You ever have a game you play where you get stuck and you say screw it and you take off, maybe a month or a year or so later you come back to it because you figure out something new. Then you're like, oh, well, I got past that part, but then another part gets stuck and kind of just repeats the process until you beat it. I recently had that with Final Fantasy V, so we're going to talk about it. Final Fantasy V. Let me share a little story here. So I think it was my 10-year-old Christmas. All I wanted was a PlayStation and Final Fantasy VII. This was back in the day when my Christmas list didn't include Asian prostitutes and a vat of honey. Well, the big day arrives and I fly into the front room of my beloved childhood trailer and start opening presents, and I get to the big one. A PlayStation with Final Fantasy Anthology. This was that moment when you're supposed to be thankful for the thought, but you're still mad because it's not the right thought. It was like my mom got me one of those knockoff Disney movies people make to fool grandparents into buying to make a quick buck. Now, I did eventually get Final Fantasy VII for a birthday. I gave 5 and 6 a shot, but just sorta hated that I didn't have 7 and played outside like a selfish jackass. Now, I will say I eventually warmed up to 6 after I beat 7, though. 5 never sat with me as a kid. It wouldn't be for years until I'd start getting deployed in the Navy that I finally went back to 5. And all the other ones. Never could beat it, though. But I liked it enough that once I became a civilian again and started buying my games on Steam, I purchased the PC version. Still couldn't beat it. Fast forward, and I gave it another go. Finally beat it and liked it enough to make a video on. So let's talk about it. Okay, I'm going to try tackling this a little differently, breaking things down by topic. We're going to start with story. Spoilers and such so you don't throw a fit in the comments. Starts off simple enough. Meteors start falling and the king goes to investigate. Why the king himself? Because this is the old days of RPGs. Kings and other royalty handled business personally. Otherwise, when things went south, the next in line for royalty or some other important person wouldn't have a reason to go on a rescue mission. Unless, of course, the king wasn't related to a playable character. Then they delegated things like you'd expect a king to do. Anyway, Lena, or Reyna, whichever version of the game you're playing, is getting Goblin Slayered when our main hero Bartz happens upon the situation and Goblin Slayers them in return. Bartz and Lena find Galuf, who lost his memory, and then run into the pirate Ferris. From here, our band of merry travelers head to the Wind Shrine in search of King Tycoon. Well, things don't go quite as planned, and the magic wind crystal breaks, preventing the wind from blowing worldwide. But our heroes now can use the Final Fantasy jobs. To keep things relatively brief, from here the party goes one by one to the other crystals, not quite getting there in time, and getting new job powers at the cost of natural disasters. It's around this time Galuf gets his memory back, and we learn of Exdeath, primary antagonist of the game. Galuf comes from another world where he and another group of 4, including Bartz's dad, beat Exdeath originally and sealed him away with the aforementioned crystals. Galuf and his granddaughter Krill head back to their world, and because they don't like rejection, Bartz, Lena, and Ferris follow shortly after. Well, that trio gets captured by Exdeath, but never fear, Galuf saves them 10 seconds later because the game is smart enough to let us keep the party together so we can level appropriately. Now that the group is together, they try to do this big joint attack on Exdeath with other kingdoms. It goes about as well as you'd expect. After that, a turtle tells them to go to the woods because Exdeath is this weird accumulation of all that is evil in the world made flesh, and the secret to beating him is in a tree. This, again, doesn't turn out so well, and Galuf dies, but is replaced by Krill. Now they can storm Exdeath's castle, which they do, and seemingly kill them. Turns out all that did, though, was merge the two worlds together, and Exdeath survived because he's that evil. So as not to dwell too much longer on this, the heroes beat Exdeath again, even after he gets a power-up, and save the world. This is what I'd call a pre-Final Fantasy VII plot, though in all honesty it's probably closer to pre-Final Fantasy VI. Point is, this was back in the day when you could actually tell what the heck was going on. No following the main plot only to find out your character is part of a crystal and has to die to save the world, or basically any of tactics. The only real twist is finding out the two worlds used to be one, and the explanation is pretty simple. There was a bad thing happening, and in order to stop it, the worlds had to be separated. The only news that can come out of nowhere is Faris being Lena's sister. That is, unless you go and find some optional cutscenes. Everything else, as mentioned, pretty straightforward, though there are parts of the story here and there that are solely there to pad out the game length. Like when you have to go save the dragon in Galuf's world, that was just filler. Alrighty, we'll get Bartz out of the way, because they're all pretty much generic JRPG characters, but Bartz is the most generic? Now, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. Bartz works for the game. You could just replace him with almost any other character that came out at the same time. A lot of that also applies to Lena. She's JRPG heroine number 877 subsection A princess class, and it's still not a problem. In fact, in comparison to recent Final Fantasy characters, or just JRPG characters in general, Bartz and Lena are still just more fun to spend time in-game with by virtue of not being brutally, emotionally traumatized psych patients gotten free. Galuf has a little bit more going on. His amnesia gives him a little bit more, and there's a few bits of foreshadowing in the game. Aside from that, he plays off as just an older version of a typical JRPG protagonist. Not much else to say. Faris has the most going on, and by default, I guess she would be my favorite character out of the playable cast. See, the thing is, all four characters, after a couple dungeons, act the same way to everything, so they're hard to differentiate. Faris had the little plot twist that she's the missing Princess Sarissa and gets those obligatory fish-out-of-water scenes when she goes back to Tycoon, but again, stock character. Krill is the final party member you get, and she is JRPG Kid the character. Are you noticing a trend here? All 5 of your playable characters are all things you've seen before. You don't have a wide variety. I don't think you could do that Red Letter Media challenge where you describe the character without describing their appearance or what they do with the Final Fantasy V cast. Same thing goes for Exdeath. He's just JRPG villain number... whatever. Gilgamesh, though? Gilgamesh is a good, noteworthy character that sticks with you. He kinda reminds me of Blue from the Pokemon games. Like, he shows up, talks his shit, gets beat, and makes an excuse to leave. He doesn't overstay his welcome, and you steal really good pieces of gear from him, so unless you just hate the guy and don't want the armor, it's legit a reward every time he shows up. He's great, I love him. I like that this is the version used in Final Fantasy XIV. He gets Enkidu and everything. There's plenty of other characters, obviously. I mean, it's a JRPG, you run into new characters in every town, but no one else is worth mentioning. And again, I don't mean that in a bad way. These are all generic, tropey characters used to ease the player along and make us say, okay, I just met you, I get who you are immediately, we're good, let's move along. It serves the game well. Ah, the job system. Showing my age here, but when I think of Final Fantasy, I think of this. Monks, white mages, black mages, summoners, thieves, ninjas, geomancers, dragoons, berserkers, all this good stuff. Even in some of the following Final Fantasy titles like 6 and 9, while you might not have been able to change jobs on the fly, they played off more like 4, where your wide cast of characters was the job pool. Translated really well to MMOs as well. Going on a tangent here, but I think Final Fantasy XI had the best job pool. I really liked Beastmaster, kinda let you play solo. I liked how Ninja wasn't even introduced as a tank, but was versatile enough that the player base figured out how to make it one. I liked how Ranger let you track mobs on the map. Last thing I'll say, I think Final Fantasy XIV would be a perfect MMO if it just had something closer to 11's job mechanics. Anywho, so with 5 you get new jobs every time you break a crystal in the first third of the game. And then a couple later on, specifically to the Game Boy Advance version, which I never played, so I will not be talking about. The idea is you master the jobs and they make your freelancer-based jobs stronger and stronger, eventually becoming the best job in the game. The thing about that, though, is Samurai exists. Once you get Samurai, congrats, game is over. For you see, Samurai gets an ability called Guild Toss or Zeninage, depending on the version. Basically, you throw money at your problems to make them go away. Sure, you may do an auto attack or cast a spell worth a few hundred damage, or you can do Guild Toss, at all the enemies for 2,000 plus damage. Do it with all 4 characters, and depending on the enemy, you can do anywhere from 8,000 to 16,000 damage per turn to every enemy. The only downside is you might have to grind Gil every now and then. As far as the other jobs are concerned, they're there. I'd argue Summoner is the second most useful because of Golem and Carbuncle. My endgame team was 3 Samurai with a Summoner. Didn't even bother going back to Freelancer. I mean, not to downplay the other jobs, but once you get Samurai, they don't matter. And I guess that'd be the first thing you could say is a problem with the game. If we're talking about issues I have with the game, yeah, we can start with every job not named Samurai. Samurai is just too powerful. Keep 3 characters as Samurai and 1 as a healer and you're good. You know what? You don't even have to do that. Just switch jobs between battles and heal all your dudes. The job system is very abusable in this game, with Samurai being way too broken. Can you produce more damage? Probably. I imagine someone has done it. But is there a reason to look for it? Not really. Another gripe I have is the number of times I said to myself, well, how was I supposed to know to do that? And I'll admit, this comes from the pampering I've received from modern games. I'm used to having waypoints and markers to follow to objectives. Final Fantasy V doesn't do that. It gives you some sort of new vehicle that lets you traverse very specific parts of the world map and sets you loose. From there, you have to find the one part of newly accessible land to progress the story. It irritated the mess out of me. This extended to a lot of bosses as well. As I said earlier, the jobs in the game are highly exploitable, but in the rare occasion you can't just guilt-toss your way to victory, you're left scratching your head wondering what to do. Like, I get experimentation, but how was I supposed to know a particular boss was the only boss in the game weak to a particular status ailment that is rarely ever used, and if I don't know to exploit that one weakness, it gets to attack 5 times a turn and do 3k damage to the whole party each hit? I can't even call it a competent difficulty curve, it's just obnoxious. So I'm mainly familiar with the PC version. I know it gets a lot of flack. I don't agree with most of it, especially people bashing the graphics and design. I can agree the 16-bit look was better, but I disagree that the new look is some horrible travesty. I think it looks fine, but lacks the nostalgic charm of old-school sprites. One huge advantage, though, is the ability to move diagonally. I know that doesn't sound like a big deal, but coming from modern games, it just feels wrong when I can't. I think the coolest thing you can do with the PC version is set up auto turns with more intricacy than just basic attack. It requires some tinkering, and you have to reset it each time you reload a save, but you can set up your team to do just about anything. Such as, say, automatically use the item Gold Needle on a particular enemy in the basement of a particular castle that yields a generous amount of AP to level up your jobs. It's not the most convenient, but it's incredibly handy and I'm glad it's a feature. Though it is a bit bugged, as every now and then, for whatever reason, when I come off my auto mode, my characters will be preset on a different option, which makes me have to completely reset everything. Alright, so Final Fantasy V. I recommend it. I recommend the PC version. Like I said, simply the original, the ability to move diagonally. You have no idea how cool that is and how satisfying that is until you've lost it. But, nah, I like it. I think you'll like it. I think it's Final Fantasy V is a good classic RPG, especially classic in the vein that they don't tell you a whole lot. You got to discover a lot of it yourself. Like, I don't think I could have beat this game without a walkthrough. There's no possible way. Unfortunately, we live in the era of the internet, so this was back the first time I played it. I'm a little kid. I don't have anything telling me where to go and where to find things. So, yep, Final Fantasy V. I like it. I recommend it. And I recommend playing it with a walkthrough. Y'all have a great day.